Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros author series. Today, we're going to be sitting down with the main man himself, founder of MSP, co-founder of Atrium, only author of Founding Sales, the one and only Pete Kazanjy. Pete, it's good to have you on. I think this is the first time in 2020, 2021, we've had actually an event with just you.
I think that might be right. I was a dancing bear with the Spiff guys the other day, which was super fun to see Tanner. But yes, this is the first mano a mano event we got going on.
I love it. Excited to have you here, Pete. And I know you've done this a little bit, but we got to ask, it's MSP tradition since about a year ago right now. What have you picked up since the start of the coronavirus pandemic? Any new hobbies or skills?
What have I picked up?
What have you picked up?
I've tried to avoid picking up any sort of microbes. I guess my answer to that last time was pizza night, so I won't bore people with that. I got a treadmill desk because I got the quarantine 14, the quarantine 15, or quarantine 40. Had that going on a little bit, so I got myself a treadmill desk, and I've been doing a good job of. I'm not using it right now, as you can tell, I'm seated. So I've been doing a good job with that. What have you picked up?
You've gotten very good at the treadmill desk if I can't even see you moving. There it is. There it is. No, that's phenomenal, Pete. And so for me, since the start of the pandemic, aside from amazing, figuring out my hair and getting that straightened out, which is great.
Yeah, it looks good. I like it.
It was real tough for me when the hair salon shut down. In addition to that, I've been slowly working my way through mastery of various rum cocktails. So I've mastered the El Presidente Sans Grenadine, which is
okay.
And now we're moving on to the daiquiri. That's next. We're gonna try to nail the Hemingway daiquiri. So
that sounds amazing.
It's delicious, I got to tell you. And in Miami, it's so much better. Well, folks, we're going to give everybody just another second to get settled in here. And I'm excited to have this conversation with Pete. Obviously, he's the founder of Modern Sales, co-founder at Atrium, and he's going to share a little bit more about himself. But before we jump into that, just a little bit of background on today's event. Today's event is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. As I mentioned, Pete is our esteemed founder. But Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for those in revenue leadership. So those are individuals that are in sales management roles, sales and revenue operations, sales enablement, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our 22,000 members where they can ask questions they maybe would otherwise struggle to solve on their own. We do that through bringing on great speakers like Pete, through our full and robust calendar of digital events, robust online discussion, and once we all get the jab, the amazing in-person events that we used to run. Everything we do is free for our community members. And for those of you who aren't, we're going to encourage you to join afterwards, and you'll be invited to join us. And with that, I'll hand it over to Pete to say just a few words about Atrium. Pete.
Yeah, so aside from being the founder of Modern Sales, I also am the co-founder of a software company called Atrium. We make data-driven sales management software that helps AE, SDR, and AMCSM managers use data to improve team performance. If you go back a slide, we're actually blessed to work with, a good helping of the folks that are actually on this slide right here. So we work with great modern sales organizations to help their line managers and operations teams and leadership really make the most of smart analytics and data in order to help their teams perform better. Obviously, it's kind of relevant in a work from home environment. So that's essentially what we do.
It's exciting. It's exciting stuff, and certainly I know Pete will be following up with folks here afterwards. But one of the great parts about this, not to bore our audience too much, but founding sales is actually what sold me on joining the Modern Sales team. I had met Pete as a newly promoted vice president of sales, and I was really trying to figure out and deprogram some of the challenges my revenue organization was facing. Pete passed along at that time a draft copy of Founding Sales, right? It was PowerPoint. I was like, wow, this was some amazing stuff. So Pete, I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit more with that context,
Sure.
and then we'll start talking a little bit more about the book here.
Yeah. So founding sales, people know me through MSP and through a lot of like thought leadership around like sales operations and kind of like modern sales management, what have you. What most people don't know is that I don't have a background in sales prior to 10 years ago, and really where I kind of started my sales journey was my last software company was a company called Talent Bin. It was a recruiting software company that my current co-founder Jason Heidemann and I started about 10 years ago. And so when we started that company, and we realized very quickly that, hey, someone has got to sell this recruiting software. Who's going to do that? And so at the time we had 5 engineers, Jason who leads our product efforts, and me as a business generalist founder. And so it kind of fell to me to be that initial salesperson, then sales manager, then sales leader. Prior to that, I had a background in product marketing and product management. I started my career at VMware, big enterprise software company. So I kind of didn't know anything about sales. It's like I was a founder who didn't know squat about sales other than like what I had learned in Glengarry Glen Ross or like Boiler Room or what have you. And so over the ensuing like 3 or 4 years, learned a ton about selling, sales management, sales leadership through my network and kind of trial and error. And so founding sales essentially is the encapsulation of all of that. And really what it is, at the time I was like, okay, cool. Like, well, I've never done this before. So I guess I'll just like go read the book on how to be a startup salesperson. And when I went to go do that, I was like, oh, there's no book. Crap. I guess I'll muddle my way through this with the help of my network and what have you. And so really what I wanted to do subsequently was like write the book I wish I had in 2010, 2011 when I was first starting out. And so the book is kind of 2 sections. The first section is like everything you need to be that individual seller, whether it's content, prospecting methodology, outreach methodology, disco, demo, closing, pipe management, all those sort of like fundamentals for an individual who's never sold before. And then the second half of the book is all around scaling that up. So hiring, onboarding, management, all those sort of basics. And that's why the subtitle on the book is the Early Stage Go-to-Market Handbook, because the idea is it's like a reference book that you can use in order to get yourself from 0 to a couple $1 million in ARR before you fully professionalize the sales organization.
I love that. I love that background and context on it. And again, for folks who are joining us here today, I can't stress enough how powerful this is. It really is different from, I think, just about any other sales book that's out there because of the perspective that Pete brought to it. Before we jump into our conversation today, just 2 housekeeping notes. The chat panel's open. Feel free to throw any questions that you have in there for Pete and I. And then secondly, the recording, we'll make this available about 24 hours afterwards. So if anyone has any questions or anything like that, just go ahead and throw those in there. And, just a quick overview of what we'll cover today here. Pete's already started to share a little bit of the inspiration for the book, but we'll dive in a little bit deeper there. We're going to then dive into some of the elements of it that are pretty essential in terms of thinking about startup selling. And then we'll wrap out with Pete's perspective as not a professional author with a little bit from him on how the hell do you actually write a book? Like, how is the sausage made? I know. Everybody's like, hold on, is that hard? Is that difficult? Well, Pete, you started to share a little bit of this with the inspiration for the book. But I want to dive in a little bit deeper into the process of it, right? Because you said you're having these conversations out there. I mean, did you turn this out kind of overnight as a synthesis of your notes, or how long did it actually take you to kind of get it there?
Yeah, so I think it started out kind of being like little point solutions, if you will. So Talent Bin, our last software company, was acquired by Monster Worldwide at the beginning of 2014, and so I had a little bit of like a more relaxed calendar as compared to like a startup calendar, and so ended up with a lot of folks approaching me, whether it's like investors or VC funds or other entrepreneurs or what have you, kind of asking kind of point questions like, hey, how do you put together a great pitch deck, for instance, right? Or how do you not fundraising deck, but like sales deck,
Yep.
or what's the methodology? How do you outbound prospecting, right? And so what I ended up kind of doing was like starting to document a number of these point solutions, right? Like, hey, how do you identify how do you identify ideal customer profile, accounts and contacts to engage with? And so these started out as kind of like outlines,
Yeah.
and then I started to kind of flesh them out a little bit more. And so this kind of started looking like chapters. And so what ended up, and what was really powerful about this is rather than people, like having one-on-one conversation, hey, can I pick your brain? Can we get coffee on XYZ? And of course, like you nowadays, can we have a Zoom coffee? The challenge with those is that information is just ephemeral, right? Like you're talking to somebody, it goes in one ear, maybe not out the other, maybe it rattles around a little bit, sticks around, etc. Take some notes down. But I think the challenge there is that coming back to that ends up being very difficult for the person that you kind of communicated this to and share the information with. And then secondarily, the you're having the same conversation a lot, and which is not the most scalable thing in the world. And so what I started to do was realize that there was an opportunity to kind of document these things out. And as you have incremental conversations, you go back and realize, oh, I can extend this document or whatever. And so very quickly it became obvious, like, you know what, this should just be like a book, right? And so that's kind of like, but the beginnings of it was, hey, we're having these conversations a bunch of times. And also I started doing a bunch of writing with first round review. So First Round Capital runs first round review, and so I had done a number of articles for them that were like hiring centric or non-sales centric or what have you, and had really witnessed the power of having something that's like very like authoritative and canonical, like an authoritative canonical asset that isn't a top 10 list of whatever, but instead it's like an actual asset that somebody can come back to. Like it's not necessarily an info read, like an infotainment read, like page turner for the beach or what have you, but instead is an asset that folks can come back to. And so that really informed the building of those chapters and founding sales as well.
So I think that's an important part of this, because this book is in a lot of ways a definitive guide, and there's nothing else out there. But it's also, if you actually physically look at the book, it's not your typical sales book. It is bigger, it's meatier. How, when you were authoring this, was it pretty even from an effort standpoint, or did you get a lot of it done really quickly and then there was a bunch that was more work, just in from the authoring process?
Yeah. So I think it's definitely a handbook, right? Like and that's one of the reasons, or almost a textbook. Um this is one of the reasons why it's available online at foundingsales.com, because books are great, like physical books are great made out of paper, but the problem with them is that they're not super searchable. Like you can't hyperlink somebody to like land here on this page at this point. And so that was one of the reasons why when I was doing it, I really, really, really wanted to make sure that we had a website version of the book that wasn't just a website about the book, but the book was deployed on a website. And in order to kind of facilitate that, because the way that the book is set up is it follows the journey, the chronology of what it is that an organization ought to care about at different stages of its existence. So for instance, there's a chapter on sales, hiring, and onboarding and management. Those are at the end of the book because it's immaterial when you're a founder or your initial seller and you're just selling your first 10 or 20 customers. What is pertinent there is going to be like your sales narrative and your, your like initial MVP sales deck and your MVP demo script and what have you. So that's the reason why like the book is structured the way that it's structured, and also it goes to the mediums in which the book is deployed. In terms of the like the kind of consistent effort, I think the joke that a lot of authors talk about is that like the first 90% of the book, takes you 90% of the time, and the last 10% of the book takes you the other 90% of the time. Insofar as like just the closer and closer and closer that you get to the end, like usually what ends up happening is like it gets dragged out, and just because you have other priorities and what have you. And that was definitely the case with me, where I think the other challenge here too was that we had I actually had the book deployed as like a friends and family version of the book was deployed as just some Google Docs. To go back to the original thing we were talking about, like where did this come from? Well, I had these like set of Google Docs that were, chapters. They were good 30, 40, 50 pages long on prospecting or outreach or what have you. But what was kind of nice about it is at a certain point, I just made them public. I just like I had an editor, Christina Bai, who's actually a friend of mine from college, and what would happen is I would just complete one of these docs, hand it off to her. She would clean it up and make it less repetitive and like fix all the like the broken things and what have you. Then we would just like make it live on the internet and just hyperlink the Google Docs to each other. Like we had a table of contents, and that the the different chapters were connected to each other. But and so that was good insofar it was like really encouraging, right? Because you could just start, right? And then and someone would be like, hey, can I pick your brain on prospecting or whatever? You're like, unfortunately I'm really busy right now, like, but here's this link, go here. Or they have a very specific question around what's the best way of like dealing with like email response rates or subject lines or whatever. It's like, oh well, you're in luck, there's actually a subsection on this outreach chapter right here. I will literally drop you immediately on that spot right there. So that was really nice to just have those live. On the flip side though, I think it maybe created a little bit of drag for me, because I'm like, well, people are already like getting a lot of value out of this already. Do I really need to like finish this thing in order to get it all gussied up and put onto dead wood? I'm not so sure about that, but eventually we got our act together and got it live.
No, I think that's one of the fun parts about the book, having known you for as long as I have, see the various evolutions. But I want to dive into a couple of the chapters that I think are important for our audience here today. And when I think about how an MSP member could really leverage this book, there's two components of it, right? There's that founder-led selling and maturity part, and then there's the basics of building and scaling the sales organization piece. One thing I did want to ask about was that first part from the founder standpoint. A lot of questions coming in, a lot of questions that came in from registration around, as a founder, how do you think about kind of giving your Legos away and hiring, and how do you all of that process? And that's something you've advised and written about here.
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing about the MSP audience, which is sales operations, sales management, sales leadership, is oftentimes they're entering these organizations and trying to like clean up the mess. It's kind of like, what is going on in here? A bomb went off.
Did anybody think this through? Did anybody think at all? What happened?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what is going on in here? And so I think that's one component of it. The other component too is that usually as a sales leader or a sales operations person or what have you, you're like, you have a boss who is the founder or the CEO or what have you, who may or may not have sales acumen, right? And so kind of one component of founding sales, and one of the kind of big surprises with this has been one of our customers, the CRO, for this like 100-person sales organization. I sent him a copy. He's like, oh my god, this is the best sales book that I've read since the Challenger sale. I was like, that's interesting, because like you're the CRO of this like huge organization and you've been a professional sales leader for like 30 years. Like, I'll take it, thanks. So I think there's definitely has been resonance with individual sellers and sales leaders, because oftentimes, especially when you're in a startup, and if you're coming from a more scaled organization, like maybe a Glassdoor or a Sales Loft or an Indeed or whatever, a lot of the stuff gets done for you, like creating decks or demo scripts or whatever, and or prospect. Oh yeah, that's marketing ops job or what have you. And so having it all in one place is really helpful. That said, understanding like what may have been skipped over when the founder, before you showed up and you were like, wow, it looks like there was a wild party in here and now I got to clean this up. Like, what exactly maybe went down? I think that the kind of like the first half of founding sales can be really helpful for that, in order to understand like which of these things that probably should have been done maybe got skipped over, because I might prioritize that. The second thing, and and I see this a lot with sales leaders, is they're like, I people will buy the book, and off of our Shopify store or whatever, and we get these titles where it's like SVP of sales at XYZ, and it's kind of like, and I have an automated thing that goes down. It's like, hey, thanks for buying this. Like, how did you hear about it? I'm like, thanks. And there's a fairly frequent case where people are like, oh yeah, I bought this for my boss. I bought this for the CEO, so he gets it. So he or she gets it. Like, oh yeah, I'm giving it to my leader. I'm giving it to my founder. So he understands how the sausage is made and doesn't just think it's like magic that like revenue just showed. So when I ask for more budget, or when I ask for like, oh yeah, I need to buy sales law for the SDR team. Oh my God, you guys are always buying software. Why are you buying stuff? Well, here's this chapter on prospecting automation and outreach automation, and why it's important, and maybe just give it a read so you can understand why that's important, right? Because founders, they don't, and this is the whole idea behind founding sales, is that most founders are not coming from a sales background. They're coming from an engineering background or products background or what have you. So without that context, their sales experience is not dissimilar to mine back in 2011. Glengarry, Glen Ross, boiler room, buying a car, things like that. They don't know how like modern SaaS sales works, and that was the idea behind founding sales. Is like, cool, you need to know what it is so you can do it yourself. But even if they didn't, here's the primer on how that actually gets done, so you understand how your sales work works.
Oh, I think it's amazing when you look at it as a tool like that. I think one of the other parts that's kind of macro in the second half of the book is really around using data and thinking about things from a more modern or more of a data-driven management perspective. While that's not all of it, there is an important part of that. Can you give folks kind of the cliff notes of what they're in for in that?
Yeah, I mean, like the way that I think about founding sales is kind of like this intermediary book. Like, it's a sequel to the really important books for earlier in the stage of an organization, are like Eric Ries's The Lean Startup, and then Steve Blank's 4 Steps to the Epiphany, also rebranded to the Startup Owner's Manual. Then there's Founding Sales, which is for $0 to $2 million. And then subsequent to that, you've got like Mark Roberge's book, the what is it? Revenue Acceleration?
No, The Science of Reestablishing Growth is his new one.
No, I forget. Anyway, Mark's book. I'm totally spacing on it. He's gonna be mad at me. So like that's one, right? Like on like modern, like scaled modern sales management, or Jason Jordan's Cracking the Sales Acceleration Formula. Thank you, Alon.
Thank you.
You're the man. Sales Acceleration Formula, like Aaron Ross's Predictable Revenue, right? Jason Jordan's Cracking the Sales Management Code, right? And so but so like founding sales is kind of like between those two things. Just like down here it's like product development, and down here it's like scaling it up, right? And this is kind of like the in the middle one, just kind of like crawling and walking before you start really running. And so the thing that Founding Sales has in there is like a chapter on modern sales management that is a primer on this. And so it tries to like deliver the Cliff's Notes of, like what's a good operating rhythm for your organization. Oh, I should have an operating rhythm. Yeah. Otherwise you're just kind of like floating about.
You mean I
Like,
can't just put meetings on the calendar with no agenda or
yeah,
island? Like what? I can't just do that.
right. Exactly. Like, hey, what does a good operating rhythm look like? What's the what's the team meeting look like? What does a pipeline review meeting look like? What does what does stand-ups look like? Um, so like that's kind of the first thing. The second thing would be, okay, like what is the, if you're going from selling to managing, what are the things that you have to leave behind, and what are the things that you now have to spend your time doing? It has information on how to do sales coaching and sales management as well. And then of course the kind of the data driven component of it around like what is a modern sales organization's metrics harness look like. And obviously, given the fact that we run Atrium, we think about this a lot, but what are the basics of the instrumentation that you need in place for your SDR team, your AE team? What are the recurring consumption points for that, how to reason against that and use it in order to understand where you have shortfalls and what needs to change and where you're having success and how that can be broadcast to the rest of the organization and systematized on. So, I mean, like the way I kind of think about it is it's like a baby version of, it's a chapter long version of what eventually, if you want to take the 301 course in it,
Right.
that's Jason Jordan's Cracking the Sales Management Code.
No, I think that's a good point too for folks that have sort of read those early stage startup books, and for folks that are like, oh, there's this more sales management focus. I think that's a good place to put it, and that kind of leads into Don Drury here has a question, Pete. I don't know if you can see the Q&A panel, but he was like, hey, looking forward to getting the book. He's bringing in and he's working with a young team who maybe has some industry experience in their market, but their sales background is a little bit more nascent, or they're just moving into a sales role. Is this the right book for them? Probably not, right?
Well, are the individuals, are they like, what is their background? Because if the individuals are like have market expertise, and I think probably what Don is referring to is like a founder, like he's probably working with a set of founders, then definitely this is literally that is literally the audience that this is designed for. Yeah, people with market expertise, people with engineering expertise or product expertise or what have you, who need to start understanding the basics of go to market and selling. Even if I think in Don's case, he does early stage sales advisory work. Presumably, even in a situation where he's probably shouldering much of that responsibility, this is probably like a baby version of what I was saying earlier, when you have a VP of sales and you want to make sure that the CEO actually understands, like, cool, how does this actually work? How does the sausage get made? So like we can talk the same language a little bit, like, more effectively.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense there. And I think that's also, there's a few other questions that came in during registration, Pete, and I think it's worthwhile to hit a couple of those. And then as questions come in from the audience, and then we'll obviously wrap here in a little bit. One of the questions is more from as a founder interviewing, right, that first sales hire. Any tips or tricks or best practices to make sure that you have a good, fruitful sort of interview process and loop when interviewing that first sales hire?
Yeah, so I would actually even kick it back a step there and talk about this in the sales hiring chapter of Founding Sales. The first thing would be to really understand what your hiring profile looks like there, and just understanding, because for a lot of folks, they don't, or for a lot of founders who don't have experience with this, they think a seller is a seller is a seller, as opposed to like, okay, this person right here has lots of experience selling to non-technical audiences, selling SMB mom and pop shops in a velocity environment, selling 3K ASP transactions, 10 or 15 a month in a 1 or 2 call close environment. Obviously, that's a very different sales motion than selling mParticle, which is where Richard comes from, or selling lunch darkly, or what have you. So just getting crisp on what the profile looks like there. So what is the sales motion? Like, what is your existing sales motion, and what are the parameters associated with this? With it, what's the ASP? Who's the audience? How technical is it? How technical is the audience? How is it? Is a complex multi-threaded sale, or is it like a two-legged sale? Kind of like use mParticle as an example, selling to marketing and also engineering, or use Atrium as an example, selling to sales operations and also sales management. If it's a two-legged sale, obviously there's more cat herding there. It's a longer sales cycle. You need AEs who are going to be more on top of their game, or like more organized. And so just converging on what that ideal hiring profile looks like before you start, well, articulating what that, saying, hey, this is what our sales motion looks like, all of you people who might be considering this role in our spec, or when you're working with recruiters or what have you. So first and foremost, understanding that, because then everything kind of cascades from that. And then the next thing would be, okay, if we know that's what our profile looks like, what are the organizations where we might kind of go shopping for that? So the example, kind of the prototypical example I like to use here is, say you're selling, you have a new HR tech solution that you sell to HR, or or recruiting, or talent acquisition, or what have you, and it's 5, 10, 15, 25K ASP selling in the mid-market. Okay, well then probably what we would want to look for there would be, sellers from the prior genre, or the prior cohort of companies that sold into that market. So the good examples there would be like Greenhouse and Lever. Both have very solid sales organizations that sell a similar ASP solution into like a similar buyer base. So those would be great places to maybe go shopping for reps there, or namely, or fill in the blank there. But it all really kind of starts from understanding what your own sales motion is, which is why you kind of have to do it yourself. Because if instead you're just like, we haven't sold anything, let's just hire a seller, well, now you're going to be in a very tough situation, versus like, yeah, we've sold a couple dozen of these transactions. This is who the personas are that this resonates for. This is the transaction size. This is about the win rates. This is about the these are the sort of animals in the zoo that you're going to meet when you're running these sales process. Okay, now we know who that profile should be, what companies we should potentially be looking to pull people out of, and then moreover, can we structure our interview process in order to validate that they have the skills that are characterized in that ICB. And then in terms of like the hiring process, I'm a huge fan of job simulation. So with respect to our hiring process for Atrium, I have sellers sell their own solution to us. So Atrium, as an example, one of the things that's really powerful about Atrium is it takes about 2 minutes to set up. So lots of organizations that either don't have a lot of analytics or performance harness in place, or even if they do, but it's like it's in Tableau or like Looker and nobody looks at it, or what have you. Atrium takes 2 minutes to set up, and then our sellers actually sell on customer data with them during like a pilot process. And so it's really important for our sellers to be able to manage a multi-stakeholder, multi-stage sale process, like doing good discovery and then carrying that information forward, doing incremental discovery from incremental stakeholders, and understand like really what's the situation in this organization with respect to data-driven management. So I need to authenticate that in our candidates. So what I have is like, first we do a disco call. They set me up as an example of like, this is who you're going to play. This is who you are as a prospect. So they set me up for that. And I'm like, cool. You give me all the pain points that I'm going to say back to you. And like, I'll mix it up a little bit, but like set yourself up for success. And then we have incremental calls after that, right? We do like 2 or 3 calls. And because what I'm trying to do is, can this person manage a time offset multi-step sales process? Obviously, we're not trying to like, make this an actual full-blown sales process, but you'd be shocked really quickly. You could figure out like, wow, this person like can't even like write an email, or like, they can't even like write an email, or like, wow, they keep forgetting to put Zoom hyperlinks in the meeting invites. Okay, cool. I think that this is probably not the attention to detail that we need in our organization. So those are, but it all kind of cascades from what the profile is that you're going to be hiring for, which of course cascades from what is your sales motion.
No, I think it sounds so stating the obvious, but really just going and saying, hey, here we go. Let's start with what our sales motion looks like, find what problems we're trying to solve, figure out how we're going to interview those people, and all of that. A couple more questions here, Pete, and then I want to dive into a little bit more of how folks can get started authoring. One note on this, and this is a question that we hear quite a bit. How do we get, so founders, some of them love to play hero ball. They always want to be involved in the sale. How do we, as revenue leaders, get them to maybe wean off being involved, especially once an organization's reached the size where they're actually doing maybe more harm than good?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Founders also, we know they have no ego at all, and they're also super, 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 super reasonable people as well.
Yeah, and super open to feedback. Yeah, so I think that probably, so my friend Clara Shih, who she actually just joined, she was the founder of Hearsay Social, and she just rejoined Salesforce as the CEO or the president, I forget what her title is, of Service Cloud. And she gave this presentation at the First Round Capital CEO Summit, which was fantastic, where she talked about how like founders are like, they're the world's best SDRs and the world's best closers. And we do this with Atrium all the time, right? Where because like I'm fairly high profile in the sales community, so we can use me to open doors, and then that gets handed off to a sales process, and then to the extent necessary can be very helpful in closing it. And by closing, what we mean is not like driving to a close and asking for the business and putting together ROI, like all that sort of stuff. It's more along the lines of, cool, we're in red lines, like this is on its merry way. Let's just get some executive sponsorship in here to like shake hands and smile and slap backs and whatever. Which, I mean, honestly, that's what you see this with senior sales leadership as well, right? Like they're not there to like run the sales call.
Yeah.
They're not there, and ideally, because that's low leverage. They're there to kind of like make jokes and take notes, right? And then buy the wine when eventually we have closing dinners again. So I think that to the extent that can be like front and centered there, that's a really helpful thing. And just being explicit about it, just like, hey, look, honestly, you're not here to we're not here to run this call. Really, we're just like, we just need you to be there in order to smile. If there are situations where I need to kick you a question, we'll do that. But otherwise, feel free to do email while you're on the Zoom or what have you. I think that can be or even like, we're going to give you a token thing to do here. We're like, you're going to be introduced around, and then like at a certain point, I'm going to throw something to you so you're involved. But otherwise, really, what the purpose here is to show that like the organization cares about cares enough about this op in order to bring the founder to the party.
I think those are great points. Be deliberate, be intentional, set some rules of engagement there, and also make sure that the founder understands what their role is in that, lest they think that they've got to carry the ball across the finish line. We're gonna wait on this live question just for 2 seconds here. Actually, no, let's take it now, Pete, and then I want you to chat a little bit more about authoring. So live question here coming in. Great question. When do you, at what point in terms of deal size do we actually have to get in person to close? And the context here, this person's, 50, 60K deals without meeting in person. What have you seen anecdotally on this?
Well, I think it really kind of depends on the context. Like, I think one of the things that we've come to find in as a result of this annoying pandemic is that turns out you can close a lot bigger deals than you thought over 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 virtual selling. And I was talking with Mandy Georgioff, who's the RVP of Enterprise from SalesLoft, the other day, and we were kind of talking about this, about like the level of efficiency that you get as a result of enterprise sellers having 2 or 3 meetings a day, as opposed to like eating 2 days via travel.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's just really absolutely fantastic. And so I think the answer to that question is like, I don't know, keep push like keep pushing on it, right? And I think the other thing too is oftentimes where the initial meeting, or sorry, where like having the meeting shows, or getting live with somebody shows up, is like post disco, when we know it's real. And then it's like the first set of meetings. But then after that, and I think Jocko Vanderkooi talks about this a lot, like the more that you can do virtual selling and selling by email and selling via selling via Zoom, the more efficient that you're going to be able to get. So it's kind of like, where do I deploy the in-person meeting? And maybe what that is that's like early in the, like once it's real, early in the sales cycle, you have that initial meeting. But then everything else is just like, all right, well, like I've seen you, I've looked in your eyes, and like I know that you're a real human being and not a bot. And then from there on forward, we can have Zoom meetings. I think is kind of an effective way of
Yeah.
like doing a hybrid move there.
I also think, look at what's going on in the consumer world. This price point is only going up, right? We're buying cars online now, no test drive. We're buying mattresses online. My mom is buying groceries online. Those are all indicators of what's going to happen. And I think Brian Halligan says it well. It's the consumerization of the buying experience. You're going to then product-led growth is one element of it, but also enterprise or mid-market selling is another. To Pete's point, you can slot in at different points in time, but I think as a society we will get more and more comfortable with a higher and higher price point purchase happening virtually. And the leading indicator for that is what's happening in the consumer world.
Yeah, for sure. I think what is changing there though is it's like more meetings are required. So we're seeing this right now when you have times of economic duress and kind of uncertainty. Freaking finance is showing up in like all sorts of deals where they otherwise would have been like, oh yeah, it's a 25K
Like
transaction. Whatever, man. That's like in the couch cushions, right? And so now that's showing up, and it's sort of like what you're just getting is way more multi-threading that is being required. So that means that there's going to be more meetings required on a per opportunity basis. Not only do we have to do a better job of instrumenting that to make sure that we understand, like, are our reps doing a good job of multi-threading? Are they getting ahead of that stuff? Are they staying in touch with the prior stakeholders as they've moved along to incremental stakeholders? But then secondarily, if we have to add on another 2 or 3 meetings to every sales cycle, well, we kind of don't have a lot of time to like be schlepping around in in an airport and what have you. So I think it, like, those two kind of things fold together, where the virtualization, the digitization of the sales motion is almost necessitated by the fact that you're getting bigger buying committees. And at least right now, finance, like, part of that buying committee is like, the person who's there to take away the punch bowl, unfortunately. Hopefully that ameliorates maybe later. Yeah, maybe second half of this year, maybe first half of next year, maybe we start seeing like less finance people involved in these sales cycles. But there are still going to, like, in general, the trend is towards larger buying committees, which means more meetings, which means higher efficiency on the part of sellers, which means more virtualization.
There's a lot that's probably worth a conversation in and of itself. Pete, before we wrap up, we've only got a few minutes left. Just any advice for folks who are aspiring to be authors? I know we've touched a lot of ground about founding sales here. Any advice for folks that are looking to get started authoring?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this ahead of time, and I think there's kind of two parts to that. One is like if you think about the way that publishing historically happened, that really informs how we all think that like what deserves to be a book or what is like merits a book. And but if you think about it, it's kind of like the virtualization stuff that we were talking about previously. You needed some big publisher who was going to put together this whole thing, and then they're going to do a launch, and there was only so much space available on the shelves or whatever. So something really had to be very generally applicable, right? Kind of like lowest common denominator. And this is not to say that like, the historical great sales books like the Challenger Sale or Spin Selling or all these folks are, lowest common denominator, but they're pretty broadly applicable. And so I think one of the things that's really kind of cool here is that because the internet has made it such that we can find these audiences more directly, you can get really narrow on these things, right? So like you could imagine, like if Richard wanted to write a book on like selling super thorny like Martech in the Martech ecosystem morass, that could be like a 100-page book right there that would be like badass. And given the fact that there's a lot of folks that are selling in that market, that would have an audience that would be really awesome, right? So I think if you think about the parts of your sales motion or kind of your experience that are unique to you and are not covered by an existing document, like in founding sales is a great example of this. 10 years ago or 20 years ago, there weren't a ton of founders running around creating new SaaS software that then they had to figure out how to sell. That was an emerging category. And so of course it made sense that there wasn't a book that met their needs. That's what created the market opportunity for founding sales. Same with these other kind of like niche things. So I think that would be the first thing is like, think about where your niche is and that isn't served right now. And then you can start handling that. And then the second thing is that as you think about starting to handle that, just starting kind of the way that I described this previously about how like founding sales started with just like a couple of point solutions around, here's how to contend with, this, here's how to contend with prospecting. Here's how to put together a great pitch deck. Here's how to put together a good demo and demo script. You can just start doing those things, like those point solutions as a, maybe it's just a blog post. Right? And then what ends up happening, you see this a lot where there's two versions of this. There's the less compelling version of this where people just like take a bunch of blog posts and like wrap them together and they're like, ta-da, it's a book. Not as big.
We'll call that the Scott Galloway model. For those of you who've read his new book, it is like the greatest hits of his blog.
Yeah, it's kind of like, thanks. Like, oh, okay, so you took your blog and you Xeroxed it? Okay. I think that's like less pertinent versus, being like having, here are these different pieces of content that handle these different cases that are needed for, like, you can imagine a book on selling med tech, like health tech to doctors. That's like, that would be like having that as something to read for somebody who's getting into that would be amazing, right? Absolutely amazing to have. Or selling, and so if you think about the different kind of pieces of that you run into in your day to day, you can imagine, oh, well, like here's a blog post chapter on literally getting through the gatekeeper there, like in the doctor's office or whatever. And just like starting is kind of the first step, because pretty soon you're like, oh, this thing is actually like it's like a snowball rolling downhill. All right, it's got a momentum of its own. Let's just carry this through to the finish.
Pete, this was awesome. We're actually a little bit over time here, and I know you're incredibly busy, but thank you so much for sharing about founding sales and kicking with us for a little bit here. It's always great to have you on. And for folks, we will drop the link in the chat one more time for those of you who are interested here. Go ahead and take a peek at Founding Sales. It's literally one of the best, if not the best, sales book for that zone that Pete was talking about. Personally, like I said, it's part of what recruited me here. So it's something I think very highly of. In fact, you could say the last 2 years of my career are owed to what was written in founding sales. So Pete, always great having you on, man. It's good to see you, and thanks so much for sharing the story of founding sales with us.
You betcha. I'll see you soon.
Awesome. Take care, Pete. Stay safe, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your day.